My name is Farhan. This incident happened about 5 years ago when the December holidays were about to begin. For several weeks, there had been talk in our house about going somewhere this time, because father had been continuously busy for the last 2 years. Mother's health had also become burdened due to household chores and everyday fatigue. I myself was under pressure from the final semester of university. My younger sister Hira kept saying that our family only looked happy in photographs. In reality, we had never spent peaceful time together. And the youngest was my brother Umir, who was 12 at the time. Every other day, he would watch videos of Nathia Gali, Murree, and Swat on YouTube and make a noise in the house about how he wanted to see snow, see mountains, sit on a chairlift, and stay in a hotel where clouds floated outside the window when he woke up. So, after much thought, it was decided that we would go to Islamabad. We would stay one night with relatives there, and the next morning head towards Nathia Gali beyond Murree. Because father liked places in the mountains where the crowded noise of the bazaar was less and silence was more. And perhaps that very silence was later to become the greatest torment for us. When we left Lahore, the cold in the air was already significant, but the excitement of the journey was far greater than that. On the way, the long straight stretches of the motorway, trees wrapped in fog, tea stalls, and old guzzles playing inside the car made the atmosphere remarkably pleasant. Father would sometimes narrate an incident, saying that in his time, people truly understood the meaning of a journey. They didn't stop the car every half hour to take pictures. Mother would interrupt him, saying that in his time, neither could they bear so much cold nor such a long drive. Hira would sometimes ask for snacks, sometimes demand that her pictures be taken, and Umir, sitting in the back seat, kept asking whether there would really be enough snow to build a snowman. I was happy watching all this. But perhaps the biggest mistake a person makes is that when everything starts to feel uncommonly good, they forget that sometimes silence comes before a storm. By the time we reached Islamabad, evening had fallen and we went to our maternal uncle's house. That night passed very peacefully. But the next day, when we set off towards Nathia Gali, the mood of the weather was quite different from before. The clouds were very low in the sky. At some places, fog had descended in such a way that it seemed the road started somewhere and suddenly ended somewhere else. The tall deodar trees on the roadside seemed as if they were standing with their heads together in some silent conspiracy. Moisture was gathering on the car windows, and in the white, dusty light spreading far and wide, everything felt somewhat different from its real shape. Father, though apparently normal, turned the car carefully at every turn, sometimes reduced speed because of the fog, sometimes looked closely at the signboard of some hotel or guest house, because the weekend was near and good hotels filled up quickly. We stopped at 2 or 3 places along the way to ask about rooms. But somewhere the rates were unusually high, somewhere there was a parking issue, somewhere the rooms felt cramped, and somewhere mother clearly said she could not stay in such a place with children. So we kept moving forward. Shortly before sunset, we came onto a relatively less populated road that went upward away from the main bazaar. There, mobile signals began to weaken. On the roadside, occasionally a closed shop, a deserted rest house, or a single bulb burning on some roof in the distance could be seen. I told father that perhaps we should turn back towards the bazaar because it was getting dark. But at that moment, we saw an old signboard on the right, with a layer of fog and moisture settled on it. The wood of the board was peeling off in places, and written on it was, Crest Family Lodge. Below the words, some faded stars were also drawn, as if once upon a time they had tried to show that it was a decent hotel, but now everything had become colorless with time. The gate was half open. The driveway inside was made of stones, and on both sides were very tall trees whose branches intertwined in such a way that even the faint evening light could not fully penetrate inside. Mother immediately expressed dislike and said that this place did not look good. But father turned the car in, saying, "At least let's have a look. If it looks strange from outside, it doesn't necessarily mean it will be the same inside." When the hotel came into view, At first glance, it seemed like something between an ordinary residential building and an old British-era bungalow. Its walls were made of a combination of stone and wood. On some sections, green moss had accumulated. The roof was sloped. In front was a long veranda with wooden railings. In the veranda, two rocking chairs were placed, which were moving very slightly despite there being no wind. It could have been my illusion, but at that moment I truly felt that those two chairs were not as still as they should have been. Behind the hotel's windows was a dim yellow light, but the strange thing was that no activity was visible outside. No waiter, no guest, no sound from the kitchen. Only the sound of water dripping somewhere in the distance, and the long, cold, breath-like noise of wind passing through the trees. Father went to the reception area. For a few moments no one came. Then from the dark section inside, a thin man emerged, probably between 50 and 60 years old. His hair was very sparse. His eyes were unusually sunken, and on his face was that kind of forced composure that often increases a person's restlessness. He neither tried to smile nor showed seriousness. He just looked at us in a certain way and said in a soft voice that rooms were available, and there was a large suite upstairs for the family, with 2 extra beds that could also be added. Father asked a couple of questions. Who else were guests? Was food available? Would there be hot water? The man gave very short answers to every question, as if he wanted to avoid too much conversation. Then he pushed the register towards us. Father began to fill it out. Meanwhile, I noticed that on the reception wall hung a large old clock whose hands were stopped at 7:10, even though it was around 5:30. I said to the man, "Your clock is stopped." Without blinking, he replied, "Time often does not run correctly here." And for some reason, his sentence got stuck in my mind like it wasn't just casual talk but carried hidden meaning. The room we were given was on the 3rd floor at the far corner. To reach it, we first had to climb wide wooden stairs. Then came a long corridor with room doors on both sides, and at the end, on the right, a slightly larger door with a brass number 307 on it. While climbing the stairs, every step produced a muffled creak of wood. The corridor had carpet laid down, but it was worn out in many places. On the way, Hira pointed to a picture on the wall and said, "This woman looks strange." We all looked. Indeed, in an old black and white photograph, a tall woman was standing at the edge of a veranda. Her face was not clear, but in place of eyes, 2 dark spots were visible. Mother immediately said, "Keep walking. Don't stare at everything." And for some reason, her voice did not have the same gentleness as before. The room was large inside and at first glance not as bad as the hotel looked from outside. There was a double bed on one side, 2 single beds on the other, and a small sitting area. A wooden ceiling, a large heater, and outside the windows, a very deep forest. Mother, reciting a prayer, had the luggage placed. Father checked the windows, inspected the bathroom. Hot water was running, and for a while everything began to seem normal to us. Even Umair jumped and said that this was a good room, and if it snowed outside, it would be great fun. I also began to convince myself that perhaps our own fatigue and the old construction of the place had created unnecessary suspicion. In the evening, we went down to the dining area. There, too, the atmosphere was unusually silent. Only one other family was visible sitting in a far corner, but they were also strangely quiet, just eating quickly with their heads bowed, and it seemed they were even avoiding looking at us. The same thin man from the hotel was now perhaps both the manager and the waiter, because he was taking orders, placing plates, and answering questions. Father asked him, "Don't you have any other staff?" He said that people came and went with the season. These days there were fewer people. Then Father joked, "The building is so old, there must be ghosts too." The man looked at him as if trying to figure out whether it was a joke or a question. Then he said very softly, "Some places, people bring their own fear with them." Father dismissed this as nonsense, but Mother fell silent, and I noticed that Hira, who usually has a comment about everything, was repeatedly looking toward the door while stirring her spoon in the plate. Around 10:30 at night, we returned to the room. The fog outside had increased so much that even the trees a few feet away from the window were not clearly visible. Despite the heater running, there was a strange dampness in the room, as if the cold had seeped into the walls and was breathing inside. Before sleeping, Mother recited her usual verses and blew over all of us. Hira said she would not be able to sleep here. Yumer first made fun of her, then himself said that he could hear someone walking in the corridor. We listened, and indeed very faint, rhythmic sounds of steps on wood were coming. Father said that people must be going to their rooms. But the strange thing was that the sound sometimes felt close, sometimes distant, and then would disappear completely for a while, as if someone was deliberately packing the corridor. I opened the door and looked out. The corridor was empty, only the yellow light of the wall bulbs and the shadows falling on the edges of the carpet. No light was coming from under any door. I came back inside, but an unknown weight had increased within me. We turned off the lights and tried to sleep. Then from somewhere far away came a faint sound of laughter, so faint that if there had been any noise in the room it might not have been heard. Immediately after that it sounded as if a small child had run across the corridor. Hira sat up at once and said, "What kind of place is this? If there are children here, why don't they appear?" Mother scolded her to go back to sleep and not take every sound to heart. Father also said in a firm tone that it was a hill hotel, a wooden building, sounds echoed. But his tone did not carry the conviction it should have. I lay with my eyes closed, but sleep would not come. Around 11:50, I clearly felt that someone had come and stopped outside our room. This feeling came before any sound, like the pressure of a presence on the other side of the door. Then very, very softly, someone pressed the handle down once, so gently that if I had not been awake I might not have noticed. Then a pause. Then the handle moved again. I jolted upright. At the same moment Father also sat up. He turned on the light and went to the door. He called out, "Who is there?" No answer. He opened the door. The corridor was empty. But on the carpet 2 long damp patches had formed, as if someone had stood there with wet soles and then turned away. Father stood there looking for a few moments, then silently closed the door and came back, saying that someone might have mistaken our room for theirs. But after that, he did not turn off the light. We somehow dozed off for part of the night. But around 2:00 a.m., my eyes suddenly opened, and for a few seconds I could not understand where I was. The yellow light was on in the room. The heater was off, even though it had been on before sleeping, and the air carried a strange mixture of stale moisture and old perfume, the kind of smell that rises from clothes when you open an old cupboard. I looked around. Mother was sleeping. Hira had pulled the blanket up to her face. Yumer was not on his bed. My heart pounded hard. I sat up and looked around. He was standing near the window looking outside. I called him softly, but he did not move. I went to him and put my hand on his shoulder. His body was cold as ice. Without turning his neck, he said, "Brother, that boy has come again." I peered outside the window. There was nothing but fog and darkness. I asked, "What boy?" He answered in a completely matter-of-fact tone, "The one who was standing near the door a while ago. He called me to come downstairs. He has a ball." The strength drained from my legs. I immediately woke Father. Father shook Yumer and sat him down. He asked, "What boy? Where did you see him?" Yumer, now a little frightened, said that he was just there wearing white clothes, his hair wet. He was not laughing, just watching, and he said, "Don't make noise, everyone will wake up." Hearing this, Mother immediately began reciting a short chapter of the Quran, and Hira nearly started crying. That night, none of us dared to sleep again. Father kept the light on until dawn and opened the door several times to look into the corridor, but each time there was the same silence, the same yellow light, the same distant muffled sounds of wood. Towards dawn, when faint light appeared outside, everyone felt a little courage. We decided to have breakfast and leave immediately. But humans often think that morning makes everything normal. When we went downstairs in the morning, the dining hall was almost empty. The manager-like man was silently placing teacups. Father directly asked him, who was outside our room last night, and is there any child staying here?" At first, the man acted as if he hadn't understood. Then he said that on that floor there was no one else besides us. Father said in a sharper tone, "Then who opened our door last night and who called my son?" The man looked at Father for a few moments. Then he said so softly that only we could hear, "It would be better if you people leave today itself." Hearing this, Mother almost dropped her cup. Father became angry and said, "What do you mean by that?" But instead of answering directly, the man simply said, "If you want, I can even reduce the bill. I don't want any argument." And that statement was more terrifying because it contained not denial but a kind of silent admission. Father immediately decided to pack our things, but perhaps fate did not will that we leave so easily. When we returned upstairs, the fog had suddenly increased so much that nothing was visible outside the window. Then rain started, and within a short time the manager came upstairs to say that due to a landslide on the lower road, traffic was closed for a few hours. Even if we left now, we would get stuck ahead. It would be better to stay until noon. Hearing this, Father became severely irritated, but we really had no other option. Mobile signals kept coming and going. The weather outside was bad, and Mother's health had also become burdened due to anxiety, so we were forced to remain there. That afternoon, Hira told us something that made the situation even worse. She said that while she was in the bathroom, she saw a glimpse of a woman behind her in the mirror, tall, very thin, with wet hair. But as soon as she turned around, there was no one there. At first, Father told her clearly not to say such things. She was scaring herself and scaring others. But Hira started crying and swore that she was not lying. Mother hugged her, but her own hands had gone cold. Umair by then had become unusually quiet. He kept going to the window, looking outside, and then coming back to sit down. When I asked him what was wrong, he said nothing, but his face clearly showed he was hiding something. As evening began to fall again, the atmosphere in the room became far heavier than the first day. The rain had stopped, but the constant sound of water dripping from the trees continued. The fog was still so thick that everything disappeared a few steps away. Father told the manager to shift us to another room or to a lower floor, but he said that all rooms had dampness, and the upstairs suite was the best. The answer was deceptive because if there were truly no other guests, we could have been placed anywhere. But he seemed stubbornly determined to keep us in room 307. This time Father insisted, but it did no good. Mother said quietly, "Let's just get through the night. We'll leave as soon as morning comes." We ordered dinner to be brought to the room, as no one had the courage to go downstairs. During the meal, several times it felt as if someone was walking very softly in the corridor outside. But this time, the footsteps did not go from one end to the other. They came close to our door and stopped. A few moments of silence. Then 2 or 3 steps back, then forward again. As if someone was listening to who inside was awake and who was asleep. Finally, Father opened the Quran on his mobile phone and began playing its recitation. Mother started continuously reciting prayers of blessing. But the strange thing was that, as the recitation grew louder, the muffled sounds of wood in the corridor also grew louder. Hira grabbed her blanket and said, "I swear, someone is bending down and looking under the door." A jolt of electricity ran through all our bodies. I bent down and looked at the gap under the door. Indeed, a shadow-like thing passed by, as if someone was standing very close. This time, Father moved to open the door immediately, but Mother caught his hand and said, "For God's sake, don't open it. I don't feel good about this." Father probably felt the same way deep inside, but he was being stubborn. He yanked the door open. The corridor was empty, but this time, despite the empty corridor, there was something that made even him freeze. On the wall below the bulb, a small handprint had formed from moisture, as if a child had leaned with wet fingers. And alongside it, slightly higher, a faint larger print of long fingers, as if an adult hand had touched the same wall. Father quickly closed the door, and for the first time, open fear appeared on his face. What happened after midnight, I still cannot fully describe in words, because some things remain inside a person more as a feeling than as sentences. But I will try my best not to leave anything out. Around 1:15 a.m., the room's heater turned off by itself. The lights flickered once. Then from outside came the sound of footsteps, not one person but two or three, walking deliberately. One soft, one light, one dragging. Then these sounds stopped at our door and complete silence fell for a few moments. In that silence you could hear your own breath, feel your heartbeat near your ears. Then came a very faint knock, not a full knock, just the touch of two knuckles. Mother suppressed a sob. Hira covered her face with the blanket. Yumer clung to my arm. Father began reciting the powerful verses loudly. But instead of stopping, the knock began to move from one corner of the door to the other, as if someone outside was dragging their fingers across the wood. Then suddenly, a loud tapping came on the balcony door. That was the third floor, and outside was an open slope and forest. No human could come from there. We all froze. Through the glass of the balcony door, nothing was visible except fog. But after the tapping, a streak like running water appeared descending down the glass, as if someone had placed a very wet hand on it. I gathered courage and looked closer. For a few seconds I saw a face outside the glass, or maybe a face-like thing. Long wet hair, a very pale forehead, and in place of eyes, two deep shadows. The next moment the fog swallowed everything. I stepped back, my throat dry. At that moment, Yumer screamed and said, "That boy is under the bed." Mother began reciting loudly. Father pulled Yumer away, and I, unwillingly, bent down to look. There was darkness under the bed, nothing. But a gust of cold air hit my face, as if something had just moved in that tight space. A few moments later, the sound of running water came from the bathroom, though all taps were off, as if the shower was on. Father mustered great courage and, taking me with him, opened the bathroom door. The light was on inside. The mirror was covered with condensation. Father wiped it with a tissue. But at that same moment, Hira screamed from behind, "Close the door." We turned. The handle of the main door was slowly going down by itself, as if someone was pushing it from outside. The handle moved 3 times in succession. At that moment, Father's composure broke. He began reciting verses from a longer chapter in a loud voice. I also started chanting prayers forcefully. Mother was crying and praying. For about 10 to 15 minutes, this state continued. Sometimes a light scratching on the door, sometimes moisture on the balcony, sometimes running footsteps in the corridor, sometimes water sounds from the bathroom. Then suddenly, everything stopped so abruptly that it felt as if someone had held the entire building's breath in one moment. What scared us most after this complete silence was not the peace, but the feeling that nothing had left the room. It had just stepped back and was watching. We did not sleep for the rest of the night. When the call for the morning prayer came from some distant mosque, Mother broke down crying. Perhaps because when a person suppresses their fear all night, at the first ray of light their courage collapses. We packed our things. Father went downstairs to pay the bill, and we stood ready near the door. During this time, for some reason, I thought to look toward the far end of the corridor. There, near the wall, a small ball was lying. Old, made of cloth, half wet, half covered with mud. I immediately remembered Yumer's words from the night before, that a boy had come to call him downstairs because he had a ball. My body went numb. I left that ball there without showing anyone and looked away. When Father returned, his face had changed in such a way that it seemed all the warmth, all the anger, and all the courage had drained out of him in just a few minutes. He did not look us in the eye, did not say that he had paid the bill, did not explain what had happened downstairs. He just spoke very quickly, "Pick up the luggage and come with me immediately." There was such strictness in his voice that Mother gathered her shawl without any questions. Hira let go of her blanket. I took Yumer's hand, and we practically ran out of the room. The strange thing was that the corridor, which all night had felt filled with footsteps, muffled sounds, moisture, and the feeling of some unknown presence, now seemed even more deserted than before. But even in this desolation, there was no peace. Rather, it felt as if something had just stepped back and was watching us leave. When we reached the lobby, my feet stopped there because the scene downstairs was not at all what it had been at night, nor what it had been at breakfast time. The reception table was there, but on it there was no register, no keys, no bell, no old telephone, and no fresh sign of human use. The yellow lamps on the wall that had been burning all night, half of them were off. The rest gave such dim light that dust appeared even more prominent on everything. Mother asked softly, "Where did that man go?" Father just gave her a look but did not answer. And the most terrifying thing was that besides our car parked in front of the hotel, there were no fresh tire marks of any other vehicle. Yet the night before, we had seen at least one other family sitting in the dining hall. Father did not waste a moment. He started the car and we drove straight out of the gate. For a long time, there was complete silence in the car. Only the sound of the wipers, the tires on the road, and Mother's muffled breaths. We all knew that something unusual had happened, but no one had the courage to speak immediately. After about 15 to 20 minutes, when we approached the main road and Father stopped the car near a small tea stall, Mother asked him, "What did you see downstairs?" This time, after a long silence, what Father told us shattered whatever little courage we had left. He said that when he went downstairs to pay the bill, at first he thought maybe everyone was in the back section. But the reception area was empty. He called out. 2 or 3 times he called, went toward the kitchen, looked in the dining hall, then the veranda. Not a single living person was present on the entire ground floor. No manager, no waiter, no other family, the one we had seen eating at night, and no sign of any recent activity. For a moment he doubted his own eyes. Then his gaze went to the wall behind the reception, where some photographs were hung in old wooden frames. In one of those photographs, this very lodge was shown, perhaps in its better days, covered in snow but populated. Several people were standing on the veranda, and among them was a woman, very thin and unusually tall. Next to her stood a small boy holding a ball in his hand. Father said that seeing that photograph sent a strange chill through his body, because the ball in the boy's hand was exactly the same kind that I had seen in the corridor upstairs, and the woman's figure matched what Hira had described seeing in the mirror. Just as Father was telling us all this, an elderly local man sitting at that same tea stall, who had perhaps been listening to our conversation, came quietly to our table and asked, "Are you people coming from that old lodge up above?" Father did not answer directly at first, but the man himself continued, "It shows on your faces. You stayed there last night, and thank God you came out at morning." Hearing this, we all looked at each other. Father said, "That lodge was open. We stayed there last night, but this morning there was no one downstairs." What the old man said in reply still echoes in my ears with the same tone. He said, "Sir, that lodge is not open. It has been closed for 15 years. He explained that a family used to live there and run the lodge. Then one year there was a very heavy snowfall. Roads were blocked, and some people got trapped in the upper area. According to locals, the snow fell so fast and the roads closed in such a way that help could not reach on time. Some say a woman and her child were left in the upper rooms. Others say 2 guests were also trapped along with the owner's family. But when the road opened days later and people reached there, no one speaks openly about what they found. Everyone tells something different. Some say everyone died from the cold. Some say some bodies were found inside and some people simply disappeared. And some old people say that after that disaster, the building could never be inhabited again because whoever tried to reopen it could not stay more than a few days. The old man also said that the locals do not go on that road after evening unnecessarily. And if travelers accidentally stop there, they often come down in the morning saying the same things. That footsteps were heard in the corridor at night, that a child came and knocked softly on the door, or that a woman was seen outside the upstairs windows. Hearing this, Mother's hands began to tremble. Hira immediately pulled Ymer close to her, and father, who always tried to give a rational explanation to every strange thing, for the first time fell completely silent. The old man's final words were, "If you really did stay there last night, do not look back, and never go up that road again. Some places may appear empty, but they are not." We wanted to ask him more, but for some reason father ended the conversation there. He quickly paid for the tea, started the car, and we drove away. After that day, none of us ever spoke the name of that lodge again. But the truth is that place came back with us, not in the form of anything, not in the form of any sound, but in the form of a feeling that suddenly awakens on some nights. For the rest of that journey, we barely spoke. The car moved through the fog, past pine forests and winding roads, but none of us saw the scenery. Our minds were still in that corridor, in that room, in those moments when the door handle moved on its own and a child's face appeared in the glass. Mother kept reciting prayers under her breath. Hira stared out the window, her eyes empty. Ymer had fallen asleep against my shoulder, exhausted from the night of terror. Father drove in silence, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. I could tell he was replaying everything in his head, the manager with the sunken eyes, the stopped clock, the photograph, the empty lobby. We reached Islamabad by afternoon. Without discussing it, we decided not to stay with relatives that night. Father booked a room at a well-known hotel in the city, bright, crowded with people everywhere. That night, we ate dinner in a busy restaurant, surrounded by families and laughter. It felt like a different world. But even then, I caught Hira glancing nervously toward the windows. Even then, Ymer woke up twice screaming that someone was calling him. The next day, we drove back to Lahore. The fog had cleared. The motorway was bright with winter sun, but the silence in the car was heavier than any fog. When we reached home, we tried to return to normal life. Father went back to work. Mother resumed her household routines. I prepared for my final exams. Hira and Ymer went back to school, but normal was not something we could find again. For weeks, Ymer refused to sleep alone. He would crawl into my room in the middle of the night, saying that he could hear a ball bouncing in the corridor outside his door. I would take him back, recite prayers, and sit with him until he fell asleep. But I heard nothing. Only Ymer heard it. Hira stopped looking into mirrors. She would turn away when passing reflective surfaces. She told Mother that every time she caught her own reflection, for a split second, she saw a tall woman with wet hair standing behind her. Mother began sleeping with a small Quran under her pillow. She also started calling a local scholar to recite certain verses in the house once a week. She said it was for blessings, but I knew it was for protection. Father never spoke of that night again. Not once. If someone mentioned Murree or Nathia Ghali, he would change the subject. I once asked him why he hadn't told us about the photograph earlier. He looked at me for a long time, then said, "Some things, if you put them into words, become more real. I didn't want them to become more real for you." But the incident did not fade. It followed us like a shadow. About a month later, I was going through Father's phone to transfer some old photos to a hard drive. I came across the pictures he had taken on that trip, the ones before we reached the lodge. The motorway, the tea stalls, the foggy trees. And then one photograph I had never seen before. It was taken from inside the car, just as we were turning into the gate of Crest Family Lodge. The signboard was visible, the stone driveway, the dark trees. And in the background, on the upper veranda, two figures stood looking down at the car. One was a tall woman in old-fashioned clothes. The other was a small boy holding something in his hand. I zoomed in. The boy's face was blurred, but the thing in his hand was clear, a cloth ball, half wet, half covered with mud. My hands shook. I closed the photo and did not show it to anyone. I deleted it. I told myself it was just a trick of light, a reflection, a glitch. But I knew it was not. I had seen that same ball in the corridor on the morning we left. For months I struggled with sleep. I would wake up at odd hours, convinced that someone was standing at the foot of my bed. I would lie still, reciting verses, waiting for the feeling to pass. Sometimes it would. Sometimes it would linger until dawn. My university grades suffered. I could not focus. The fear had settled into my bones. One night I finally told my mother everything, not just what happened at the hotel, but how it was still affecting me. She listened, her face pale, then said, "What you saw was not ordinary, but you are still here. You are alive, and that means Allah has protected you. Do not let the shadow become bigger than the light." She took me to a respected religious scholar who specialized in such matters. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he closed his eyes and said, "There are places where tragedy occurs and the souls of the departed remain attached not as evil spirits but as echoes of pain. They do not harm everyone, but sometimes to a person who is sensitive or tired or vulnerable they appear. They seek recognition, not revenge." He gave me a small amulet with specific verses written on it. He told me to keep it with me when I slept. He also taught me a morning and evening supplication to recite. "Do this for 40 days, he said. "The fear will leave." I followed his instructions. Slowly, the nightmare stopped. I stopped waking up in the middle of the night. The feeling of a presence in my room faded. By the end of the 40 days, I felt almost normal again. Umair, however, took longer to recover. He started seeing a child psychologist, not because my parents believed in ghosts, but because they believed in their son's distress. The psychologist said it was trauma, a form of PTSD from a frightening experience. She worked with him for months. Eventually, he stopped hearing the bouncing ball. Eventually, he stopped screaming in his sleep. Hira never fully explained what she saw in the mirror, but she grew up careful, cautious, always looking over her shoulder. She still refuses to stay in old buildings or hill stations during winter. Father sold the car we had taken on that trip. He said it was because he needed a newer model, but I think it was because every time he sat in that driver's seat, he remembered the fog, the lodge, the empty reception, and the photograph with the woman and the boy. Years have passed. I am married now with a child of my own. Sometimes when we talk about vacations, my wife suggests Murree or Nathiagali. I always say no. I make excuses: too crowded, too cold, too expensive. She does not understand. I have never told her the full story. But I am telling it now because I have carried it long enough, and because someone out there might need to hear it. That lodge, Crest Family Lodge, is still there. I checked online once years later. It appears on no official booking site. There are no reviews, no photographs, no contact number. But some old travel forums have mentions, brief, cryptic, often deleted. People write things like "do not take the road above the old bazaar after sunset," or "avoid the building with the broken signboard," or "we heard a child knocking." I do not know if the manager we saw was a ghost or a man trapped between worlds. I do not know if the other family we saw eating in the dining hall were real guests or echoes of past visitors. I do not know if the woman and the boy died in the snow, or if they are still waiting for someone to acknowledge them. What I know is that some places are not meant to be visited, some doors are not meant to be opened, and some silences are not peaceful. They are the silence of something watching, waiting, hoping that you will turn around. We did not turn around, we drove away. We did not look back, and for that I am grateful. But I still have the memories, the smell of old perfume and wet earth, the stopped clock, the handprint on the wall, the ball in the corridor, the voice that called my brother's name. And sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet and the wind is still, I think I hear a child laughing, just for a moment. Then it fades. I recite my prayers, I pull the blanket tighter, and I do not open my eyes. If you ever find yourself on a foggy road in the hills and you see a signboard that says Crest Family Lodge, do not turn in. Do not stop. Do not look up at the veranda. Drive past, keep driving, do not look back. May God protect every traveler, every family, every child from places that are empty but not vacant. May He give us the wisdom to recognize danger before it touches us, and may He forgive us for the doors we opened that should have remained shut. If you liked this story, please like the video and leave a kind comment. Subscribe to the channel for more true stories of the unseen. We will meet again, God willing, with another story.